Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here, spending your afternoon and early evening with us, everybody in person and all those online. This is part of the Author Talk series from the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. Pleasure to have you here. My name is Stuart DeCue. I'm the Executive Director of the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. If you're hearing a small echo, we will correct that in a little bit. So this series started when we met Vincent Stanley. So Vincent wrote a book, The Responsible Company, came to campus, and we had a chance to kind of, exhaust him with 30 meetings across campus with everybody we could think of to talk about the book. And he really
but not a strong emphasis on change. And I think it's gotten a little bit more so with the development of RECs and the development of I'm missing the word.
It'll come to you.
It'll come to me. It's the simple thing. It's what everybody's buying in order to
Oh, offsets.
offset,
Yeah.
in order not to make the change. And then the third element was what you spoke of in the book about your recommendations for change. And you made those recommendations at both an individual and a corporate level. And one of the things that you were commenting on is that people in their individual lives talk about buying an EV or not using straws or recycling their plastic, while not working for larger change in the society that would actually change those practices on a big scale. And that corporations, even when they start with sustainability work, tend to be navel gazers about it and change their own practices without lobbying for policy change or without working with other companies or with other industries to make changes. So those are the three themes that I identified, and I wanted to kind of connect. You've also been, in addition to your sustainability work, you've also been on the city council in Basalt and have been engaged. I'd like you to tell the story. I know it's an old one, but it leads into a lot about changing the light bulbs and the problem with the Holy Cross recreational rural electrification
Sure.
association.
Yep. Okay, so first, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining me this evening. Thank you, Vincent, for having me. Stu, thanks for hosting, and Kathy and Heather, who's not here. So my history is I was the corporate sustainability guy. And I came in at the very beginning of that field when Interface Carpet, some of you, if you've studied this, Ray Anderson read Paul Hawkins' book, The Ecology of Commerce, and said, business is going to be a tool to solve climate change, and it will do it on the free market. And I loved it. It was awesome. And the idea was so sexy. It was, we're going to use intelligence and design to replace resources and energy. And it's the stuff of like glorious TED Talks, and the guy I worked for initially, Amory Lovins, he said, business has got to do it because there's like 40% return on investment on the table. If it were 30 years ago, changing these light bulbs would have like 100% return on investment. So business has to do it. So I started doing that work and we changed light bulbs. There's actually 2 light bulb stories. I'll give the mini first one. I came into the company to your old guy, Pat O'Donnell, a guy who came from Patagonia. And I went, and he had hired me, and we went to the hotel manager of a 5-star hotel, massive energy hog. And I said, we're going to change all the light bulbs. It's 100% return on investment. No good business person would ever turn down this opportunity. And he said, no, we're not doing that. I said, wait a minute. This is what I learned essentially in my grad school in sustainability. And he said, this isn't a Motel 6. We're not putting curly Q fluorescents in here. And I tried again and tried again and tried again. And I ended up taking me several years to do the easiest thing in sustainability. And I thought, oh my gosh, if this is the thing that you do before you do the hard stuff, and I can't even do that, this whole thesis is wrong. And that's been my work. And if you read specifically chapter 4 of this book, the whole sustainable business thesis is a problem. It's wrong. It doesn't work. So to your point, I continued plugging away, changing light bulbs, building green buildings, putting in building controls, changing boilers. And then one day I said, I'm going to check the carbon footprint now. And I got all the data. And here's what the carbon footprint was doing. Going straight up. Imagine you get out of grad school, you do this job. They told you this is how it's going to be. And at least you'll reduce your carbon footprint. And I didn't know why. I did not know why it was going up. And I was literally like, was it hotter or colder last winter? So we needed more natural gas. No. And it took several days before I realized that the utility was mostly coal, but it invested in even more coal. And so this was one of the great epiphanies of my life, which was, oh my gosh, it's not about us. It's not about me. It's about the utility. And then the next question was, what is a utility? How does it work? How is it governed? And this story goes on. I won't tell the whole thing, but in the book, we talk about figuring that out and deciding our job as sustainability, or my job as sustainability guy at a corporation wasn't to reduce the carbon footprint of the operation. It was to change society. And this utility powered 60,000 people, including Vail Resorts, our arch enemy, anyone who's familiar with that. And for the record, just to gripe, since I'm leaving my position, I called Vail and I said, will you help us with this campaign to change the utility? No, too political. That's the world. That's the world we're in, where you know the thing is right and you try to do it, but no one wants to help you and you're alone, and you've been alone for your whole career.
So I can attest to our version of this, which is more recent. Is we made a commitment in 2017 to refine the way we make polyester and nylon for garments, because the best we were able to achieve was 40% recycled polyester or nylon without reducing the performance. And so we made a commitment in 2017. By 2024, we're going to change this, and we're going to do 100% recycled, and therefore we will be using no virgin oil. And we accomplished this 1 year early, patted ourselves on the back. We're on our way to carbon neutrality. No, because those fabrics are made by mills that are fired by coal. And so then the next step, it's all like unpeeling an onion. The next step was to conduct an experimental program with a couple of sympathetic mills to make a transition to renewables. And that hasn't been successful yet. They're still working on it. I wanted to, this epiphany that you have to change the whole system in order to change your own operations. And in order to change the whole system, you have to work cooperatively with others in the industry, and you need help from the government, civil society. When you talk about your the love of place, and the whole title of the book, Terrible Beauty, how does this connect when you advise people to engage politically, to read a little bit of climate science every day, write a letter? You argue that corporations, that B Corps should be evaluated above all on how much they advocate for policy. How do you have a sense? It's curious to me that you don't make recommendations for people in their working life, and not in the book. But I was wondering, for the people here and also for the people online, a lot of people who are heading out to start in their working lives, do you have a sense of what you would advise people to do?
Right, from within the workplace.
Yeah.
Well, so, and Daniel and I were talking about this. You graduate from a place like Yale, you've got your degree in environment and MBA, and you go into business, and by the way, you're young and hopeful, and you want to change the world, and you care about climate change and democracy and governance. And they say, you're going to work really in the scope 3 emissions accounting, and you're going to dial that. You're going to dial that in for this corporation. And then you say, great, I'm going to crush that. What about next year? Next year, you're going to work on scope 3 emissions in a this corporation, then you're going to expand the practice. What about next year? Same thing. So my book is written for people like you who fear, hey, I wanted to change the world. I wanted to do something incredibly meaningful with my life. But instead, I'm in the back room, I'm doing carbon accounting. And if you get into my book, you'll see that I see that as complicit with the status quo. It's a way for business, conventional corporate sustainability is a way for business to appear to be diligently working hard on sustainability, but to not get in the way of the fossil fuel economy. And it's worked beautifully. They're almost essentially every corporation has bought into it, and almost nobody's doing anything different. So my advice to people within business is, we need you within business, but as soon as you get some credibility, which is you showing up on time, you're doing a good job, they trust you, you have to start talking to your boss and maybe to the CEO in language like this. Hey, you know, I know we're doing carbon accounting, but our company, and many of these companies have missions that take into account climate. You say you care about climate. So what are we doing to actually move the needle on that? Has the company thought about offering, as we discussed, consulting practices to get people to wield power and drive bigger scale change like a utility? Have you made a statement as a company on the need for policy? So you have to suss out whether that business that you're inside has the ability to do more. And I think the problem is a lot of these businesses don't want to do more. They're doing a thing that they make money on. They're tracking carbon or whatever, or advising people on lead design, and that's it. And they're not radicals and they're not revolutionaries. And what's difficult about this time is we need revolution. We need a social movement. We need to fix democracy. We need to fix governance. And the question you've asked and I'm asking is, does business have a role in that at all? And the answer might be, maybe not. Maybe business is incapable of being the force for change we need it to be. Now, obviously, I think that it can be. And part of the evidence I have for that is the fossil fuel economy that we live in is brought to you by business. It created it. You didn't create it. And this is an important point. All the decisions about doubling down on fossil fuels and then eventually hiding climate science and owning politicians so that essentially you could never pass climate legislation, that was brought to you by the fossil fuel industry. So that policy was created by these guys. Could business also, if so inclined, create the good policy? And there are more and more businesses that are realizing, oh my gosh, climate's a threat to everything: commerce, supply chain, customer base, so forth.
Yeah. There's one of the, another sort of discovery we made at Patagonia. We started a small food company. And when we started it, we sort of came up with products that looked like they were going to do well in the market, or that we could create a better product than something else. And we had our epiphany when we talked to Wes Jackson at the Land Institute. And he was talking to us about a perennial wheatgrass called Kernza, with roots that go 9 feet into the ground, tear up the microbes and the bacteria, create topsoil faster than nature can. And we said, oh, that's fantastic. Where can we buy some? And he said, oh, you can't buy Kernza. And we said, why not? He says, I can't get any farmer to grow it. Why not? So no farmer can plant what he can't sell. So we arranged with a brewery in Portland, Oregon, to include Kernza as an ingredient in a lager, and then got 100 hectares of Kernza planted in Minnesota. Now we've got several thousand. So the point of this, I think that what business can be good at is, we changed the business model. And the business model for provisions became every new product has to solve a problem in the food system or in agriculture. Business has a potential, not a lot of businesses are going to do that, but when business does that, You don't have to go to the government to raise taxes. You don't have to go to rich people to for grants. So I think that that's the biggest potential we have for being a force for good.
Yeah. My complaint with that
Yeah.
is that it plays into the hands of the free marketeers who say, do whatever you want on a free market and we'll continue to run this fossil fuel economy. And the problem is that you cannot, ultimately one business that does one project is not going to solve a systemic problem, especially an economy that doesn't recognize pollution. So unless you're putting in guardrails around agriculture, around carbon, you're not actually going to get to the solution. And so a big piece of my book is that the well-intentioned work, this stuff is amazing. It is complicit in that it plays into what the fossil fuel industry would want you to do. And this was a thought experiment I have in my book, which is, what would the fossil fuel industry, if it wanted business, which is so powerful and nimble and respected? Think about Apple. Apple customers, they're fanatics. There are a billion of them. People love Apple. What would we force an Apple or other powerful, influential businesses to do if we wanted them to appear like they cared about the environment, but never get in the way of the fossil fuel economy? And it would look like, measure your carbon footprint, certify to third-party standards, buy carbon offsets, set goals and aggressive targets, no carbon by 2050, and never do anything that changes the system, never do anything dangerous, scary, radical, never write an op-ed to the Wall Street Journal saying we have to have federal climate policy, never mobilize your employees, as Patagonia has done, as a social movement, nothing dangerous. So it's sort of like you can do anything you want as long as you don't do anything that matters. And so that's the essential problem of corporate sustainability. And guess what? Also modern environmentalism. And I know you've been a victim of this too. Well, I will say what I just said. I will say, don't you understand? I'll say this within my company or to community groups. And people say, yes, I hear what you're saying. Can you figure out how to run a ski lift on batteries? And I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? Did you miss what I'm saying? I'm talking about a systemic change, and people go instantly back to, can we recycle this? Like that, it's maddening, but we're in it.
Yeah.
And there's a historical reason why we can't think differently.
I agree, but I also think that one of the things that has resulted from the whole shareholder primacy thing from Milton Friedman in 1970, the change in the way business started to think, is that the companies the size of Apple, and the size of Google, the size of the car companies, we've started to have, even Patagonia, much smaller, is a globally run company. And we've lost a lot of the kind of place-based businesses. We've lost that sensibility. So I think that that's also important to revive.
Right.
The idea of small restorative, regenerative businesses, as well as put the feet to the fire of the big companies, because they're not going away. We're not going to have personal computers handcrafted
Right.
in Blue Hill, Maine.
Yeah. Well, so the do we have a crazy echo here? Is that persistent? A part of my book is rooted in outrage and frustration, and I've spent a lot of my life frustrated. And let me just give you reason to also feel frustrated, all of you. Think about Apple. It's a great example. It's such a cool company, and it's so big and so powerful. So in 2009, Apple says the thing that I'm saying, I think it's gone now. I think that says we're going to drop out of the US Chamber of Commerce because the US Chamber of Commerce has opposed climate legislation every time it's come up throughout history. By the way, the US Chamber of Commerce has opposed every piece of progressive legislation. So in 2009, Apple says we're out based on hallelujah. That's awesome. Okay. But they remain members of the Business Roundtable. In fact, Tim Cook is on the executive committee of the Business Roundtable, which was created in 1972 to block all regulation. It was created as a backlash to the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts. And it was successful. And we never passed major environmental legislation after that. And so Apple is just one example of a corporation that's utterly disingenuous. A couple of other examples, Microsoft. Microsoft said, we're going to go carbon negative by 2030 for the whole history of our company, while they were massively investing in AI to help find fossil fuels. And so two whistleblowers within Microsoft, Lewis, you can look this up, Holly Alpine, Atlantic Magazine, Microsoft, and said, this was all public. It was, Microsoft said, we're so pleased to be partnering with these 50, oil majors to find oil, and it's going to make their job even better. It was all public. And the media, like, this is part of the problem. The media is like, Microsoft, you're so great. And I don't know if you all saw Apple's ad a year and a half ago. It might have been during the Super Bowl. 5-minute ad where they brought in Mother Nature to do an audit. 5 minutes. They never said one thing about power or policy or movement. It was all, how much water are you using? And the problem is, if you talk to that CEO and say, these are all great and hard things, will they solve climate change? No, because it's just you. It's just Patagonia, it's just Apple, or it's just 30 companies, and the globe has no regulation, and the nation has no carbon tax, and it's not a solution. So it's very, there's a lot of complicity, and the media sort of being dumb and buying into, when a company says, we're buying nature-based offsets, which don't work for the most part, and we're carbon neutral. That's outrageous.
Kind of going back to, what are your thoughts on the relative failures and successes of the environmental movement? It's interesting, when there hasn't been there have been some major treaties about biodiversity. There hasn't been major US legislation since Clean Air and Water Act, which were pretty remarkable. You could develop film in Lake Ontario in the early 70s, black and white film, by dipping it in the water and taking it out.
Nice.
If I drove a van down to LA to deliver pitons to the heat treating plant, I could count in August, I could count on tearing up. But that made a major difference. And one of the things that interests me now is that we have kind of a muddled, we have in many ways an ecological collapse going on. So it's not in our urban air and water, but it's in the pollution of the streams, it's in the eutrophication of the rivers, it's in the acidification of the oceans, it's in the greenhouse gases. It's in the loss of insects and the loss of mammals. In addition to climate change, we have what feels now like a gradual collapse until we have a big fire, or we have, you can't drive to Miami Beach at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because the water comes over the causeway. But how did we get, I'm kind of wondering, how did we get to define the environment as climate only when we're really talking about the places we live? Has that made any kind of contribution, do you think, to this, the present state, where people don't feel a sense of agency except in their personal lives. I'm going to buy a Tesla and then find out that Elon Musk is nuts.
Yeah,
You know,
bummer.
I'm going to forget about straws, but I'm kind of interested. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I was an advocate of climate being sustainability. You know, people have said, what is sustainable business? Well, unless you solve climate, you can't solve anything. So it's this uber issue. But in terms of American environmentalism, think about it. You could say, let's say it sort of started with Thoreau. And Thoreau is interesting because one, he said, the way you be an environmentalist is you repair your bean patch, right? And your community. And he did talk about civil disobedience, but that was really about his individual acts. And the interesting thing about Thoreau's time was that you could repair the world by doing small things because we didn't have the Industrial Revolution. We didn't have all this. So I've argued partly that modern environmentalism was so tied to that individualism, you know, that we never could get away from it. And then climate came in and no one could understand it. It was too big. And then to your point, it wasn't tied to place and people lost connection to place. And so they didn't have this motivation. But there's more to it than that. And a lot of it has been that American society has so badly failed to deliver to people the basic tools they need to thrive. You need, and these are all failures of the free market. So you should not live in a polluted world, but you need housing, you need healthcare, and you need education. All four of those, pollution being the fourth, are failures in a free market system that require regulation, the regulation of which was never opposed by the architects of right-wing fundamentalism, the pre-Milton Friedmans. The guys who founded the right-wing thinking that Fox News loves and cites all the time, one of them was a guy named Friedrich Hayek. And Hayek, he was an Austrian economist, and Hayek said, I love free markets, but not everything can be unregulated. For example, pollution.
Yeah.
So Friedman was demonstrably wrong on everything. And if you haven't read, we talked about this, Naomi Oreskes' book, The Big Myth, how business taught us to loathe government and love the free market. You gotta either read it, it's like that fat, or Google a 1 hour summary of it. But this is what she's talking about. So we didn't get to this place by accident. There was a whole neoliberal free market movement that started in the 40s. The Laura Ingalls Wilder books were free market propaganda. That's all in the book. The Little House on the Prairie books. We can do it, but Pop got a lot of government assistance. You'll never see that in the book. And then radical change in the 60s, where we had massive government intervention in society, Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, EPA, NEPA, Endangered Species Act. And in 1971, a guy named Lewis Powell said, no more. Lewis Powell wrote a memo called the Powell Memorandum. He said, we got to take back our economy from business. Powell was appointed to the Supreme Court after that. 1972, business roundtables created. And then to summarize, no major environmental legislation ever again. So yes, Montreal Protocol, 1987, which controlled CFCs. CFCs were created by DuPont and they had a solution for it. So was that really good, like radical regulation?
I'm thinking of the biodiversity treaty, which is later. But
Right.
yeah.
But the biodiversity treaty wasn't the Clean Air Act because it had no teeth.
On this cheerful note, we're going to open it up for questioning.
Yeah.
Try to keep this concise. Test. Nice. I'm going to try to keep this concise, but it might meander. I'm seeing this through line of like individualism that's tied to how we think about our economy, how we think about climate, and I think the biggest application in this conversation is how it ties into your point about revolution. That effectively everything that we live in, we've invented, and we can change, with enough power and will to do so. So if I'm thinking about individualism in the context of economy, there's this American dream that, bootstraps ideally without the government assistance to pops, that you can, make a life for yourself. I think that's increasingly, middle class is being hollowed out. People are kind of coming to terms with, that's getting harder and harder, especially with, the lack of the four things you described. But then on the climate level, there's only so much you can do as an individual, not buying as much, not traveling as much, sort of these like self-flagellating things that ultimately make you feel, maybe guilty, and don't do a ton, kind of the classic, like, well, you don't compost. What are you doing talking about environmentalism? And ultimately, I think this through line of individualism is maybe what needs to be challenged, and maybe sort of shifting the lens away from this really like as granular as possible inward looking view and towards a more outward looking 30,000 foot view, and maybe that would enable a bit more. Obviously things still have to happen in our day-to-day communities, but maybe if we were able to pull the conversation up a bit more, there would be, I guess, more room for that revolution. Not sure where the question was in that, but curious to hear you two react to that.
Well, See Beauty Terrible by Schindler Auden 2025. That's what my book's about. And what you're talking about is in the book, which is here the situation Americans are in is you come to me and you say, I care about climate. And I'm a right-wing guy. And I say, well, how'd you get here? I drove my car. Gas car, yeah. And you flew from the West Coast? Yeah. Did you like that? Yeah. How do you heat your house? Yes. You like cold beer? Yeah. Shower? Hot shower? Yeah. And then you can't talk, right? And for me in a ski resort, you can't talk. You fly people from Europe, and this is designed by design. This is the history's in my book. By design from the fossil fuel industry and the plastics industry to make you feel guilty and to shut you up. But here's the thing. You didn't, and by you, I mean American citizens, you didn't say, hey, I want cold beer and hot shower mobility. Can you provide that in a way that will destroy civilization? We didn't say that. We did say, provide that in the cheapest possible way. And fossil fuels did that. And you don't hear this in the environmental movement. Fossil fuels were a miracle. They brought people out of poverty. They changed human health. They opened our eyes to the world and helped us see the broader society. They were amazing, and the people who worked in that field died for you. And mostly, other than the leadership, were good people. And I know those people, some of those people. But in 1950, scientists said, oh, there's a problem, basic problem, CO2, which keeps us safe and enables our atmosphere. It's getting warmer. more CO2 makes it warm. We got to do something. So 1977, ExxonMobil knew exactly the science. 1977, ExxonMobil used a supercomputer, probably the size of this building, to estimate warming by 2015. And everyone says, oh, don't believe the models suck. They said it's probably going to warm 1.3 Celsius by 2015. Exactly right. Okay, so they knew. So what would a good society do? It would use science to inform policy, and it would say, hey, no, let's not panic, guys. Let's take 50 years to get off fossil fuels. We'll invest in R&D. 1980, Jimmy Carter said, let's have 20% of our power from solar by year 2000. And do it slow, change the economy. Instead, what happened? Buried the science, funded disinformation campaigns so that people don't believe the science even today. And the money in politics ensured that if you didn't support fossil fuels, you couldn't get elected. So that's the answer. Yes is the answer. What else? Don't be shy. Yeah.
So my favorite part of your bio was that you call yourself a self-proclaimed dirtbag. You kind of list out some of the fun adventures that you've been on. And I know a lot of people in the outdoor space today, particularly athletes, have started as outdoor athletes and then transitioned more to environmentalists, conservationists, and trying to see what they can do with their part, partly informed by their experiences outdoors. So it'd be great to kind of hear like if there's a certain adventure, like certain point from like your youth or growing up that like really stood out as an inflection point of like, I need to dedicate my life to this.
Yeah, this is a very rich topic for us because Vincent is a dirtbag.
No, I'm a fellow traveler of dirt
Oh,
bags.
fellow traveler. Okay, that's a very fine distinction. But Chenard's a self-professed dirtbag. And interestingly, so I have several pages on the concept of dirtbag in the book. And at one point in my work where I've worked at a ski resort and a hotel resort, I'm presenting to 200 people and I say, you're all a bunch of dirtbags at some point in the talk. And a dirtbag in the outdoor industry is an honorific, right? It means you're all in, you'll eat potatoes all summer so you can climb. And afterwards, HR comes to me, hey, Auden, can we talk? And I say, yeah, what are you going to talk about? You referred to the group as dirtbags and someone was offended. And I said, how long have you worked in the outdoor industry? Oh, I've worked in it 30 years, the woman says. And I say, so I couldn't say anything more honorable than dirtbag. And she said, well, I don't know. This is my life, like getting my wrist slapped. And so that's just a funny story. But Vincent, you should weigh in on this too. I have an answer. But part of what you're getting at, and I've thought about this over the years, think about the great American environmentalists. John Muir, he was a mountaineer. He used to tie a crust of bread and then go climb Shasta. David Brower, he was fundamentally a climber and a mountaineer, and then he became head of the Sierra Club. Yvon Chouinard, Jeremy Jones at Protect Our Winters, same deal. So this love of the outdoors, and Vincent, you started talking about the kind of appreciation of the beauty of the world. And that's what the cover's meant to be, is damn, it's a beautiful world. Like, take a minute, any moment, like when you walk out tonight, pause for a second. Even here, even in a city, it's beautiful. And what an opportunity we got to just be alive. And it's kind of screwed up. Someone took a marker to it and someone thought a flower would look good on it. But that, which I learned in the outdoors, and I will give you a story of that, is what motivates. The vision of the book was, man, it's not working talking about economics. It's not working talking about national security. We got to get to people's souls and really get them to care.
Yeah. And in the case of Patagonia, it was the fact that most of the people who worked there in the early years were climbers and surfers. So there's just something that happens when you get a mile from the road that changes your relationship to the world. in which human beings don't seem to, even though you feel yourself as an agent and you feel yourself also as vulnerable, human beings don't feel at the center of the world when you're dealing with the power of the ocean or when you're dealing with the mountains. And the desire to protect those places really affected the people in our company. And the fact that we had a very solid person in Yvon Chouinard owning the company meant that there was widespread internal support for all of the early efforts to give money to grassroots environmental organizations. And it was only later, like 15 years later, that we started to look at our own practices and say, hey, we don't like what we're doing here. We need to make changes. And we did work. I mean, the only way we were able to be as successful as we have been, which is not all that successful in relation to what needs to be done, but that we were able to work with other folks in other companies and also work with suppliers and also to lobby and help support the people who were working on making that work possible.
Just to give you the quick hit on the story. So like part of, as you read this book, you'll be reading and then there'll be a section on turtle hatching in Hatteras. And these are meant to be these moments of pause and reflection and joy. But in my life, so I had, my kids are now teenagers and going to college or in college. But when you have little kids, do you have kids?
No.
Oh, you did. Okay. So when you have little kids, well, you know this, they drive you crazy and you're exhausted.
Yeah.
And I was camping with my family once and I was like, I need a freaking minute away from these kids. And so I grab my fly rod and I go to the lake and I have 5 minutes because it's full on. You do not get breaks as a parent when they're young.
Yeah.
And I cast and I catch a brook trout and I reel it in and I hold it. A mature brook trout. Any of you know, Paul, I know you know what a mature brook trout is, but you should Google this. Like a mature brook trout has Cormac McCarthy calls maps and mazes on its back. The end of the road is about a brook trout.
Mm.
And I'm holding it just completely frazzled. I was completely frazzled. I'm looking at it just in absolute transcendent awe of the world and of existence. And you all have had moments like this, but that was sort of the moment to say, God, there's something here. You know, there's something, just the fact that we get to be alive. And don't you want to be part of protecting other people's ability to experience this too?
Yeah. And you need to have the ability to feel that in your working life.
Right. Which a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
I have a question from online. This question is from Noah. His question is, if revolution is our only path forward, how do you recommend we start small in our own communities to share these ideas for real change and begin to move the needle? Where do we draw the line between progress and just making noise?
Taking over the Rural Electrification Association Board is
Right.
first.
Well, this is a really important question, which is, you know, we need, call it revolution, or you could call it social movement. We need the thing. On one hand, it's like, what do we do? It feels like democracy is collapsing and we can't fix climate unless we fix democracy. And another way to think about that is, if there's one thing human beings do, it's revolution and movement. We've done it throughout history. It comes naturally to us. The United States has long history of it. The only thing we know is it's hard. You know, the civil rights movement, if you compare that to the climate movement, nobody in the climate movement has worn out a pair of shoes. but hundreds of people in the Montgomery bus boycott wore out shoes. That's a big deal. Like, it's hard work, it's difficult. One of the things I also say is, when we were working on the rural electric co-op utility, I couldn't go to meetings because I was scared to go to the meetings. My company said, you can't talk about this anymore, it's too controversial, and I got attacked in the papers. I had trouble sleeping at night. Ah, that's progress, right? If you have a thin mic and you're giving a TED talk, you're probably not changing the world. So the point is that you chip away at the thing we know how to do, and there's all kinds of literature on this. I was just talking to Daniel about this book Chris Hedges wrote called Wages of Rebellion. It's like a guide to this, and it talks about why it has to be nonviolent and how you do it, and then on your day-to-day, well, how do you, the environmental movement has been individual action, and individual action looks like recycling this plastic bottle. No, individual action means being a citizen. And that means showing up at town council, showing up at your elected official's office, writing letters, running for office, engaging in, when Bernie and AOC come by, going to that, talking to your friends. And it's difficult and it's dangerous. And this is partly why corporations are going to have trouble here, because we need them to speak out and lead. In fact, you could argue the thing that's missing in the United States, where's the corporate leadership? But our company, we've looked at, hey, we should say something. And here's what one response was. We operate on public lands, national forest land. You could destroy our 77-year-old business if you shut down our ability to use public land.
We just started a group with the Conservation Alliance called Brands for Public Lands this week.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But think about a company like, I wonder if we join that, because a company who we protest and then they're like, we're shutting you down.
Yeah.
That's the whole business. And that's the whole regional economy. It's incredible.
Is there a issue that you think might resonate across the political spectrum today that you're hopeful for? As you try to start the revolution, it tends to come from one side often today, but you're trying to co-opt the whole, the whole group, and something that might resonate. So you're not just banging your head on the wall, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I think we shouldn't look at this Trump phenomenon as a complete catastrophe. I think we should look at it as massive disruption that happens in society. Americans were not getting any of the things they need to live good lives, and there was a disruption. So in those moments of pivot, of weightlessness, if you're a skier on the top of a bump, you are weightless and then you pivot, or if you're a surfer, or different sports have the analogy. As you're sliding downhill like Superman trying to self-arrest. So it's a pivot opportunity. Where's the common ground? Well, there are two pieces. One is, let's think about like just being bipartisan on what's happening in the United States today. Do you, right, left, and center, believe that Congress under the Constitution has the right to decide where money goes? Yeah. I don't care what they do with that. Like, they could not agree with me, but they should be able to do it. There's a point of agreement. Do you believe that due process should occur? Yes. Do you believe that the courts are a co-equal sector of government, and should they be obeyed? Yes. So I believe there's a core of, constitutional support that we may see playing out. I'm very pessimistic, but may see playing out. But then the other piece is that the discontent among Americans, and maybe even more globally, is partly a result of, bad governance, and environmentalism has never been a big enough movement. It's been a luxury. But now it's overlapping with housing, with transport, with labor, with healthcare. And so the progressive movement offers, offers a lot of things that environment would be bundled as part of. And so I do think I think we're in a very, very interesting period where it's not, there's the capacity to come out on the right side of it. There's a capacity to collapse into authoritarianism too. But that's all tricky moments are like that.
The other thing I think we could see is in the disruption in the economy from climate change. For instance, in Maine, where I live part of the time, the lobster industry has moved from about 200 miles north, and now it's going to be heading up to Canada after a while. So there's real concern in the working class communities, and those are good jobs, the way that coal mining jobs were good jobs. How do you change the economy? And that's all becomes a local question rather than just saying, we'll have a Walmart come in. And I think that can affect doing a little work on the rural-urban divide could affect the politics in an important way. I think we're good. Do we have anybody else? Stuart?
Yeah, I'm wondering about the kind of tools, the modern environment, a lot of it, Ezra Klein talks about this abundance bit, like there's a whole element of where it was about being able to actually like sue and hold the government accountable for things that they weren't doing. When you were able to clean up the Cuyahoga River, when you're able to do these things, build all these new institutions. Now there's a part that's about building actually an entirely new economy. And like, what are the ways you would frame or think about, like, how do we frame the building challenge where a lot of it was stopping before?
Yep.
And now it's about kind of a real rebuilding and replacing that isn't necessarily like a core instinct or reflex of a lot of folks who've been involved.
Right.
Like,
Right.
How do you frame that, motivate it, get tools?
Yeah. Well, this gets to your question, which is where's the common ground? So a common ground is that many of the laws from the 1970s, in particular, the National Environmental Policy Act, gave wealthy individuals the ability to stop anything. So think about stopping high density housing in California next to a mass transit stop. NEPA allows you to do that, and across the board. So the right says reform NEPA and the left says reform NEPA. And so what we need, and this is what Ezra Klein's book is about, is it can't take 5 years to do big infrastructure projects that are critical for environment, trains, housing, density, and so forth. So I've spent like a shocking amount of my career fighting the environmental community. I've fought them on small hydro. Others have fought them on wind. And what I'm fighting is the traditional land conservation, charismatic megafauna people against the climate people. And so I think that we need reform. This could be a moment for that in the nature of the deregulatory environment. But Ezra Klein, that book, I don't know if Stu, if you've seen this, but he's been hammered partly because he's right. We have to be able to build, but he's also kind of like missing the fact that you just can't go infinite.
Yeah.
And he's also put some faith in false solutions. Like he tosses off that small modular nuclear might be a good deal. It ain't. We can talk about that. And other like false solutions. So, but this is the thing. It's like, are we capable of doing great things? And are we capable of, essentially putting aside the old school environmental movement, which Patagonia came out of, and saying there's a new thing, and it looks destructive. It's the YIMBY, yes in my backyard movement, not the NIMBY, which is, if you want to define a modern environmentalism, it's NIMBYism. Protect our town, keep it how it's always been.
I have kind of a related question. Should I talk to the mic for this?
Also, thank you for this. This is wonderful. Kind of related to the sort of like abundance piece and the conservation piece. I do not remember who wrote this, but I went on a trip to the Amazon last year through a university in Sao Paulo. And one of the pieces we read was like about needing to reframe climate change and conservation as like, we need to save ourselves. The world, like the earth will still be here and it will outlive humans. And it's not the humans' job to save it, but it's our job to work with nature and the environment so that like our species can survive, if that's a priority, which it is, I think, for people. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that sort of relationship, or like if there's a world in which reframing this movement could be effective, or if it's not, that's not a priority, I guess.
Yeah. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'd say we need a Copernican shift where we thought that the universe revolved around the earth. I think that we have to have a sense of humanity as a part of nature. And that can address some of these conflicts, say with Ezra Klein versus the idea of half Earth. I mean, I think this point about NIMBYism as a kind of negative force is a real thing. I live most of the year in Santa Barbara, where we banned any construction for 30 years, the people I voted for in the city council. And then we ended up with 90,000 new jobs and 90,000 people driving on the freeway 100 miles
No
to
housing.
work
Yeah.
because there's no housing. So, but I worry about the progressives going from being environmentalists to being builders without questioning using the conventional building practices that we have, using the conventional development ideas. And I worry about any kind of progressive movement that hits humanity against nature, because I think it's a false dichotomy.
Yeah, so there's just infinite challenge in this YIMBY thing. It's really, I know this isn't your question, but there's some funny, you know, and where I live, and this is true in Santa Barbara too, if you're like the land trust, everyone loves you. But what did the land trust do? It protected land, which by definition makes your house more expensive, which means it's harder to live. And it also locks up land where you could build housing. And so you get what Santa Barbara got. And even today, it's like land, I love land. But a land trust in a modern environmentalism would be a land and housing trust. It would do both. But no one's saying that. There's a 2.0. And similarly, when I was on town council in Basalt, one of the most brutal jobs you'll ever have, we had a park parcel in town, and they said, we want to protect it all as a park. And I said, no, you can't, because we need housing. So take half of it and put super high dense housing, super dense. This is to your point of conventional versus thinking differently, and go up 5 stories and make it deed restricted so it can't escalate in price forever. Everyone on council said no, everyone, because we want to protect small town character, which means YIMBY, which means freeze in time. To answer your question, it's a little bit of an ethical, to me, it becomes an ethical question, which is the environmental movement, which was the spiritual nature of the world, we must protect it, didn't resonate with everybody. And when you say it's about people, it's true, because we're not saving the earth will be fine, we're saving civilization. But if we fail on climate, what we stand to do is put 1 billion people, force 1 billion people into horrible suffering. And what happened to all the world's religions where we said we didn't want to do that? Like, don't we profess to care about human beings? And is that all just bullshit? You know, like it really is, pick your religion, but they all have a piece of treat people the way they would like to be treated. And so that's really dark and negative, but there's also hopeful, which is to say that in human thought, we have said that there's really only one thing we care about, right? Consistent among all religions and philosophies is that we should treat people well. That's hopeful, right? Because the thing we all agree on requires solving climate. Yeah.
Maybe related to building as well, you mentioned utilities and how that was a big barrier to decarbonization because a lot of the energy we use is coal powered, et cetera. There are a billion people, over a billion people now that don't have reliable access to energy. How do we get businesses excited about building out that infrastructure? How can we push demand for that? You said fossil fuels were a miracle for lifting people out of poverty. It seems like we have an opportunity to do that now with clean sources of energy. Like, what is the right way to message that? How do we get people interested in lifting others up?
Well, first, I don't know that you need to do much to get clean power to take off. It's the cheapest, solar and wind with storage is the cheapest form of new power. Nuclear is not even in the game. Gas is way more expensive, and no one's talking about coal. Like that Trump was talking about coal is absurd. We're not, guess what, folks? We're not burning rocks anymore to make electricity. So it's happening. India and China, if you look at what they're installing every year in clean power, it's through the roof. So part of what you're getting at is, well, how do we get society to say, how do we help these other countries do that more rapidly? And that's this, we've failed at that, these green funds and so forth. But just I want to take it down to a much more local American angle on it. So my daughter is studying in Cuba, and we just visited her. Cuba's using, as far as I could tell, leaded gasoline with 57 Chevys, and their grid is 80% bunker fuel oil. It's horribly polluted. And we don't like them because they're authoritarian. Well, if you cared about people and humans and children, you'd open up trade with Cuba. Obama started to do this. And the solar companies would come in there and you'd be all clean grid. Hawaii is moving in this direction. Your cars would be cleaner. Your economy would boom. American economy would boom. Cubans, it's the whole, like Tom Friedman, the earth is flat, globalism thing that's actually true in some cases. So partly it's opening up, like, why do we care about Cuba? Are we really scared about Cuba? It's a disaster. So open up trade. So that's on one. And then the other is, until governments say it actually matters that India's, developing in a dirty way, it's going to be super difficult. It's above my pay grade, but you're asking the right question.
Well, it seems like, especially in India, there's an opportunity because so many people don't have electricity there. It's kind of like how they never had landlines in India. They went straight to mobile phones. It seems like we have an opportunity to do that, but I don't know how to get Americans excited about that.
Americans excited about India?
Yeah, or just about like development in other places, I guess. I don't know. A couple of us are taking this project finance class right now, and you can make money off of building renewable energy, but it's really hard to do it in other countries. So I don't know if there's messaging that would work to make people excited, but it's like there's so much opportunity, and it's just that we can't close that gap and get there.
Right.
Can I have something on that? I think that like the current moment of uncertainty and shaking up the world order also allows you to reshape up what we think is the position of the United States.
Yeah.
Like China succeeded over a 20-year period in becoming the engine of clean energy technology in the world through no messaging on climate change, but on energy security. Like they did that because they wanted to get off oil and gas that came from places that were pegged to the dollar. And they don't need our help. Like in other ways, we are dependent and more interdependent on the global economy for things that we don't produce here. And so I think that like you have to actually look to other places in a lot of ways of where we may not actually have the solutions we're looking for, and they may actually exist and reside in other spots, and they're going to accelerate faster than we are. And that's a shift of, I think, where the kind of American exceptionalism that people may have internalized over time, like might need to be reinvigorated or reconsidered or kind of put back into a different form that's we're, more humble. And if you're humble and you're uncertain and you listen a little bit more and you take in better information, then maybe you speed up.
Yeah, that's probably the one greatest and positive advantage of globalism is the ability to communicate around the world so people in Amsterdam can talk to people in Dhaka about sea level rise and how do you navigate that? And we didn't have that capability to speak quickly. I don't know about moving quickly 25 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, you get like this is now way outside the realm of what we're talking about, but as I've grown up in the United States and gotten older, I've slowly become disillusioned with the greatness and exceptionalism of our country. And going to Cuba didn't help. I just read Barbara Kingsolver's The Poisonwood Bible, which is about the Congo, same story as Cuba, where we basically held this society down and destroyed it. And if you look at Germany post-World War II, the Germans say this bad thing happened and we talk about it and it doesn't diminish us. And then they can proceed as a modern society going forward. And I feel like we need that in the United States, you know, that we need to reject this exceptionalism. We need to say we did some bad stuff. Like the race issue in the United States is appalling and horrifying. And we're still not through it. Why can't we talk about it, accept it, and say now we can proceed? And I think until we have that reckoning, it's going to be difficult for us to, you know, you're right, Stu. It's like, we're number one. We're going to tell you guys how to do this. And it's so exhausting. And we've been so bad at it. All right.
One more.
Thank you so much. Super interesting, and I look forward to reading the book. I'm a visiting fellow from Finland, so I just wanted to maybe throw in a few things and see whether they resonate or not in terms of how environmentalism is playing out. I'd also lived out of Finland for a long time, but you know, we have the whole, obviously the EU Green Deal, which is not popular with the rest of the world because it's seen also as extraterritorial because of some of the legislation that's coming in and having a carbon price there and having CBAM, et cetera. But I mean, do you see opportunity still for a move, a change, sort of a push for more engagement and more picking up some of these policies, and especially the circular economy? When I moved back to Finland, there was a lot of talk about sort of resource wisdom and whatever that means, which then played into just slowly creating circular economy policy that now is part of the European Green Deal, basically through the ecosystem for sustainable products policy means that within the next X number of years, 5, 10, whatever will be realistic, because it's a very sort of framework legislation. Only products that are, they have the longevity, planned obsolescence out, they have to be recyclable, they have to contain recycled content as well. So there's the full sort of life cycle approach, and there's going to be the digital product passports that go with that as well. And obviously, if that works, that's pretty radical. So is this something that could be a framework that could be adopted much more broadly, and an area where we could be working much more together?
Yeah. Well, first, we don't want to hear from a functional government. We don't want to be lectured by someone who's figured out government. Yes, you know, the difference is circular economy in the United States means mess around in the free market and be complicit. Whereas in Europe, it's actually legislated with guardrails to make it happen. So that's an incredible opportunity. And Europe is so far ahead of us, and even in price of gasoline, carbon fees. So it's all like the hopeful point is we know how to solve climate. I mean, part of the problem in the conversation has been Bill Gates says small modular reactors, and this is also Ezra Klein's book, direct air capture, blah, 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 blah. No, those are all hydrogen false solutions. But we have the policy tools that you're describing, and we have the technology that you're describing on the shelf today to solve this problem. And then you get a guy like, is Bill Nordhaus still here? You're Bill Nordhaus saying, it's pretty simple, costs more to do nothing than to do something. And so yes, I mean, we really look to Scandinavian countries in particular in terms of how that policy gets deployed. But
Circularity is also a great way to restore a sense of place, agency to a sense of place, because circularity requires everyone to, one business's waste to become another business's feedstock in a geographic area or in a bioregion rather than spreading it out.
We had an excellent example of that this morning, here or over at Croon Hall as well, with circular design and circular designers showcasing what they're doing. And it's an interesting moment in time, because if Shein and Temu and all of these companies suddenly will have these amazingly high tariffs on them or costs because of de minimis, maybe there's a return to that, which is very local, very concrete, very sort of, it's possible if everybody just, puts the information out there in social media and creates a movement. Maybe that's part of the revolution, one sort of inspiring piece of it and segment of it, and coming out of the amazing students here at Yale.
Thank you. Thank you all. I think that please remember that within a few years, we will not be run by a room full of James Bond villains. And the imagination that's been at work for the past 15, 20, 25 years will continue to be developed in other places, and also here in a quieter way than usual. So thank you.
thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Yale and Stu. And thank you all for spending so much thoughtful time with us.
Yeah.